Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you may be, good day. This is the Telerik DevCraft Q2 2014 online conference. Be responsive, .NET UI for any device. Thanks for joining us. My name is Jeff Fritz. I'm a Microsoft MVP, ASP Insider, and an author. But more importantly, I'm a developer advocate for Telerik. You can reach me on Twitter at C#Fritz and on my blog, www.csharpfritz.com. Now, this is a very exciting webinar we have ahead for you. We're going to show you some of the great new things that we've released as part of our DevCraft suite. But just for showing up today, I've got a surprise for you. We're going to give away 10 DevCraft complete licenses in a raffle at the end of this event. You're already signed up for the raffle just for showing up. How cool is that? So get out there, tell your friends that they better join in if they want to get a shot at one of these free licenses and learn about all the cool things that we have for you in our new DevCraft products. Let's take a look at our agenda for today. First up, I'll discuss some tips for building mobile-optimized ASP.NET projects. I'll then hand over to Michael Crump, who will talk to us about managing documents within .NET apps. And finally, we're going to build line of business apps with map, Gantt, and diagram controls. That'll be brought to us by my friend Sam Basu. Now, if there's one thing that I want to make sure that you take away from this about Telerik, it's that we want to support your development efforts, no matter what device or operating system you're targeting. This is important to you, and it's important to us. We want to make sure that you have the tools you need where you're developing. Recent studies have shown that the number of people who are accessing the web from mobile devices is going up significantly. In 2013, we saw almost 74% of the web visitors coming from mobile devices. By 2017, we're going to get over 90% of the web audience using mobile devices. Now, for a .NET developer, we've been dealing with different size devices, different size windows when we've been building VB6 apps, or maybe WinForms apps, or WPF apps, or even Silverlight apps. But now with the web and trying to deliver content for these different size devices and different size browsers, you don't have resizing taking place on a mobile device. You don't have a browser changing size and shape on a tablet or on a phone. We know that devices are hard to manage. Android has many different screen sizes, as this model demonstrates, where iOS has about a half dozen different device sizes and browser sizes that we need to be able to accommodate. We need to make sure that our web content grows, shrinks, and sizes appropriately to fit into all these different devices, as well as desktops, laptops, and other Windows tablets. Look, there's 3 approaches to modern development. You can take the native approach like many of us have done with VB6, WinForms, and WPF in the past. You're going to write C# or some other language and present content and applications that work on Windows or maybe iOS or Android. Or you could take a hybrid approach and you could do something in HTML and JavaScript with some CSS that'll get packaged around a web browser that's written into a specific type of application that will be installed inside of a device that'll be made available to an app store so that it can be installed on a device. Not bad. I'm writing my web content and it works on all my different devices. But really the one that I want to focus on here is the mobile web, because I can write that content for the mobile web using HTML, JavaScript, CSS, anything that generates that stuff, and I've got a reasonable development cost. I know what it takes to build those things, and every device that has a web browser, and there isn't a device that doesn't have a web browser, can access my content. It's a win-win situation. So I want to cover today 5 tips to make your website better on all devices. I'm going to recommend you implement a page layout. This way you can scale and grow your content appropriately on screen, showing and hiding things appropriately depending on the size of the browser. We're going to take a look at using UI design to enable touch interactions. Let's face it, your phone, your tablet, you don't have a keyboard on those things, you don't have a mouse. Let's optimize for touch-first interactions. And then we need to make sure we output HTML markup that is optimized for that smaller bandwidth and these smaller devices. Do you really want to send down a bunch of tables and content markup that's optimized for IE6 to your iPhone or Android users? It might not be the best idea. Let's bundle and compress our static content. Our JavaScript, our CSS, these things aren't changing that frequently. What can we do to optimize delivery of those things? I'll show you how we can get a better handle on that. And finally, let's use alternative renderings of our content where appropriate. It might make sense to deliver content that looks and feels native to a mobile device. And other times it might make sense to render it with a look and feel that's unique to your application. We'll take a look at how we can implement those interactions. First up, let's take a look at the page layout capabilities for devices. I want to make sure to keep in mind not just phones and tablets, but desktops and laptops. We want to make sure that our web content looks and feels good on all devices, even that giant screen that you might have hanging in the conference room. When we do these page layout capabilities on our web pages, it's not quite the same as formatting for browsers that resize. There's other things going on here. We want to use responsive grid layouts to assist in laying out our content. This will help us to place things on screen so that they feel uniform across all devices. The responsive grid frameworks use media queries, a new feature in CSS that allows us to specify CSS rules for specific size browsers. The typical responsive grid is actually 12 virtual columns wide. This allows us to abstract away the media query capabilities and focus on just where we want to put things on screen. As a developer myself, who's not very CSS savvy, this is a great thing for me because I can focus on where I place my things in these 12 columns instead of trying to figure out various sizes of devices and where things should appear on my iPhone versus Android. I can just focus on columns in a grid. That's easy for me to do. Telerik now ships a layout framework with our Ajax toolset, and we support the Bootstrap framework with Kendo UI for MVC. So you've got a bunch of options there for how you can implement this page layout capability. Let's get into our first demo where we're going to see how the Telerik Ajax page layout works, and we'll take a look at how Kendo UI for MVC gets out of the way and enables Bootstrap to just work. All right, let's get started. Let's take a look at these demos and have a little bit of fun here. All of these demos are in the Telerik Demo 2014 Q2 project that was built and maintained in Visual Studio 2013. You'll get access to the source code for this project in the follow-up blog post that we'll write for this webinar. This project started off as an ASP.NET project with web forms and MVC added, and then we turned on the Q2 2014 ASP.NET Ajax controls and added in the Telerik MVC extensions. This first demo is in 1_layout Ajax ASPX. It contains a page layout and some layout rows and some columns so that we can see some content. Let me start this in Chrome. Let's take a look at what it presents and then come back into the markup and take a look at how we can modify it. So here we are at Jeff's Pirate Hat Emporium and Laundromat. If you've been following several of my other webinars, you know that I really enjoy the Pirates of the Caribbean movies, and it's a topic that I keep coming back to in my demos. So here's an example where I've got a menu bar across the top, I've got some information presented, along with a rotator, and down here at the bottom I have a typical Ajax scheduler showing the schedule for today, when we're open for laundry, and when hats are for sale. So not too bad. Looks like something that could use a little bit of work, but it's got some functionality to demonstrate. Now let's take a look at how the responsive grid behaves when we start to resize the screen. As I begin to resize the screen, notice how the 100% width controls, the scheduler and the menu bar, shrink appropriately with no significant issues. But there, look what happens there. The photo of our wonderful leader there disappears when I get to about this width. That happens to be about the width of a tablet device that's turned into portrait mode. And I continue to shrink this, and you can see other things begin to happen. The menu bar changes. Our scheduler on the bottom shrinks appropriately to this width. Not bad. But other responsive things happen when I tell ASP.NET that this is a different browser looking at this. That uses a technique called adaptive rendering. and we'll take a look at that a little bit later in the session. But notice the rotator sizes appropriately as we shrink and grow the browser. It handles it. Additionally, there's a light box hiding behind this picture of the wonderful owner of our establishment. And it sizes appropriately for the window. I can shrink and it goes away. And it sizes appropriately again as the screen gets bigger. And that's the type of responsive behavior we would expect from our controls when we're working in this environment. We want them to size appropriately for our browser for whatever device it is that we're working with. Now let's take a look at the markup that we use to make this happen. We define a page layout with ASP.NET Ajax using the Telerik Rad Page Layout. The layout has a series of rows, and each row has content. Inside the content, we can host other controls. Here on this row is where we can start to see things getting a little bit more interesting. We have a composite layout column that spans 3 virtual columns, and inside of that it has several rows. The row with our pirate image, and then another row detailing the services. The sibling column that spans 9 contains the rotator. When we look at the data source, it's reaching to a web API endpoint, a HATS controller, performing a GET operation to retrieve data in JSON format. That data source ID is wired up in the Telerik Rad Rotator with the client's data source ID attribute, HATSDS. We then specify a client template that uses our standard Kendo UI templating markup to specify where the image URL for the hat belongs, as well as the name of the hat and the price of the hat. Now that we've seen where these items are placed inside the grid, let me go back up to the page layout control, and I can turn on the show grid attribute here to true, and we can see exactly where those grid columns are that we're working with. I'll go back to Chrome. You can see these blue vertical bars where the grid actually is. And they go all the way from the top to the bottom, overlaying all of our content. Might be a good idea not to do this in production, if you know what I mean. So let me resize, and you can see how the columns start to shrink. Right? And there comes a point where they just don't want to make them any smaller, and poof, we're now at the next snap size. So when you start to work with the grid layout, try turning on the show grid option so you can see exactly where your grid columns are. Now let's see how we can do something similar using Bootstrap and MVC. For this, I've specified a demo controller that has a layout MVC action. All it's going to do is return a view. Let's take a look at that view. This view page contains some standard Bootstrap markup. We use CSS classes of row and column definition classes. The Bootstrap column definition classes that start with col, C-O-L, and then a size specifier. That could be extra small, XS, small, SM, medium, MD, or large, LG, and then a number of virtual columns to span. In this case, I have one row with 2 columns. The first column is going to span 3 medium columns or larger, and then a second column that's going to span 9 medium columns or larger. So if it's a medium or large grid, this is the layout we'll have. In a small or extra small grid, these 2 items will be stacked. Let's see how this looks over in our browser. Here we are in MVC, and this is Jeff's cat shelter. And you can see there's my content in the left column, aligned nicely. And then I have a Kendo UI bar chart over on the right, outlining the different types of cats awaiting adoption. Kendo UI gets out of the way and allows the Bootstrap theme to do its work. All you have to do is include the Bootstrap CSS and specify to ASP.NET MVC that we're using the Bootstrap theme in Kendo UI. Let's go back over to the slides and take a look at our next tip. Let's make sure we theme for those touch-enabled browsers. So we've got our content sized appropriately, but we need to make sure that people's fingers or styluses are able to touch the screen and work with our content. So make sure you don't hide your content behind hover interactions. Let's face it, most of our devices can't detect when our finger or stylus isn't touching the screen. Let's use modern HTML5 input types on our forms. This will allow us to present forms where when the user interacts with it, those text boxes will actually present a keyboard that's been adapted appropriately for that data type. A telephone number text box will present a phone keypad. A URL text box will present a keypad that expects to insert a .com or a .net in it. An email text box will present something that contains an @ symbol along with the .com, .net, .org extensions. Let's make sure we provide ample room in our input areas and touch targets for people's fingers. I don't know about you, but my fingers are a lot bigger than that mouse pointer. Let's make sure that that works and we don't end up touching two touch zones at the same time. Telerik provides a pair of themes called Metro Touch and Black Metro Touch that enable this capability in our Ajax toolset. Let's take a look at our next demo, where we'll show you how we've touch-enabled our themes and what impact that will have for your end users. Let's take a look at our Ajax touch themes that we can use to make our web pages feel better for touch interactions. I'm looking at 2_touch, and this is my demo that's quite timely. It's Jeff's multi-themed World Cup demo. I've loaded up into my scheduler here the times for all of the World Cup games in Pacific time zone. Scrolling down, you can see I have a grid where I've output the same data, and it's got several pages, and then an editor, and then several standard HTML controls that are decorated using the Telerik form decorator. At the top here, I'm using the Telerik Rad Skin Manager to allow me to choose different skins to paint on these controls so that you can see the effect of using a touch-optimized theme for your user interface. This is the standard Telerik theme with silver and green embellishments. When I choose one of the Metro Touch themes, my page automatically refreshes, and you can see things are much bigger here. It's very easy for my finger to fit inside these objects. And I've got a lot more space in between items, and my spacing is much bigger so that my finger can work with these objects. And look at that drop down for the Choose a Theme drop down box. It's much bigger now. And look, my arrow fits easily inside of it. Scrolling down, when we take a look at the grid, look at how much bigger things are, and how the numbers in my page are so much bigger. Big enough for me to fit my finger in without accidentally touching a different page number. The rows are nicely spanned apart so that I can touch one row without touching another. Same thing with the editor here. Look at how big the buttons are and how easy it is to get to those drop downs. Finally, look at how the standard HTML controls have been adapted so they're nice and big and easy for my fingers to touch. Let's take a look at changing this to the Black Metro Touch theme and how that impacts things. It looks and feels the same, but it's got this dark tone now for darker websites. The colors are virtually the same, but everything is sized appropriately for this. This is where things are appropriate to size and display for the touch-enabled browser. I highly recommend you check out the touch-enabled themes, Metro Touch and Black Metro Touch, for Telerik UI for ASP.NET Ajax. Let's take a look at our next set of slides about appropriate rendering of our HTML markup. Next, let's tune our output with appropriate rendering. Stephanie Walter makes this comparison of responsive design, responsive layout, like when you pour water into things. When I pour water into a teacup, the water becomes the shape of the teacup, or the teapot, it becomes the shape of the teapot. The same thing should be taking place when we talk about our devices. When we pour our content into these various shaped displays, it should just fill it and become that shape, just like water. So let's use modern HTML5 markup. This will allow us to take advantage of the assets and resources available to us on these devices. We can use responsive techniques to allow our content to fill the space available appropriately. Make things grow to fill the space that's being provided. The Telerik Ajax controls have an automatic render mode that will adapt the rendering of those controls for your devices. Let's take a look at our next demo, where we're going to explore the Ajax render modes and how they impact some of the new controls that have markup now available with the new render modes. Let's talk about render modes for ASP.NET Ajax. In this demo, 3_render mode ASPX. I've placed two controls on the screen, my menu control and my scheduler control. I'm already using my Metro Touch themes here so that I've got my nice big easy to grab user interface. But what's important to note is that when these controls are painted on the screen, by default, they use what we call classic render mode. Classic render mode is optimized for all browsers going back all the way to IE6. What's important to note about IE6 and this release is that this is the last release that will be supporting Internet Explorer 6 with the Telerik controls for ASP.NET Ajax. Going forward, the minimum browser we will support is Internet Explorer 7. We also offer a lightweight render mode that uses HTML5 optimized markup, CSS, and JavaScript. In this way, adornments on our controls that were being handled by images that could be done with CSS gradients or other CSS3 rules that are supported by the HTML5 specification are used instead, thus reducing the amount of content we need to ship to your browser. We can turn on lightweight mode by changing the render mode attribute inside of our controls. Let me go over to Visual Studio and flip the render mode for these two controls to lightweight and see how it changes the appearance of our controls. I'll change the render mode here to lightweight and also for my scheduler. Let's go back to Chrome and see how this appears. It looks exactly the same. There's an additional render mode that we should take a look at, mobile render mode. Let me turn that on and see how it changes the appearance of our controls. Now things are a little bit different. Now, for my menu, the menu bar that goes across the screen has disappeared and it's been replaced with this grippy, this hamburger icon that appears. And when I click on it, my menu still appears and I can still get to my child menus, but it's mobile optimized, something that I might expect to see on my phone. My scheduler has this Metro Touch look and feel, and things are much bigger. We're using font icons to present the interaction points here. And I can open up new appointment windows, and it is optimized for a mobile browser. But it would be a real pain in the neck if I had to go around to all of my controls and label whether I want them to be lightweight, classic, or mobile mode. It'd be really great if we could put that somewhere high in our project and almost have a switch that we could flip to say, make everything render this way. And in fact, it'd be even better if we could say, you know what, Telerik? You decide what type of rendering we should use. If the user is requesting with Chrome or Firefox or one of these evergreen browsers that fully supports HTML5, give them the lightweight rendering. But if it's a mobile browser, give them the mobile rendering. Anything else? Return the classic rendering. Well, we went ahead and built that. I'm here in the root web config for my project. We can turn on automatic rendering for our application by just adding this key, render mode equals auto. Let me save that. I'll also remove the render mode attributes over here and refresh the page. And it looks good on Chrome. It's important to note that we need to remove the render mode tags on our individual controls because the render mode specified on a control overrides any site-wide render mode that's been specified. As a final demo of the render mode, let me show you what happens when I enter the emulator mode of Chrome and make my ASP.NET project think I'm requesting the content with a Nokia Lumia. I pressed F12 to bring up my developer tools here at the bottom. I press Escape to bring up the Emulation tab. And now I'll choose a Nokia Lumia phone. I'll click Emulate. And you see it resizes, but we need to tell ASP.NET that we're requesting with the Nokia Lumia signature. So I'll refresh. And now automatically my controls have been replaced in their rendering with the appropriate markup, CSS, and JavaScript to support this browser. Now we have a switch that we can flip to automatically convert my website so that it looks and feels better with the Telerik UI controls on a mobile device. That works for many of our controls, and we're going to make many more work in the coming months. Let's take a look at our next topic about bundling and minifying content. Bundle and minify your static content. This is one of those performance tuning things that after you do it the first time, you'll wonder why you haven't been doing it for a while. Modern browsers can only download 6 items simultaneously, and older browsers can only download 2. That means that while your content is being downloaded for CSS and JavaScript, it's not loading any images to paint on the screen. That browser behavior could lead to an unsightly effect on your page that wasn't expected. CSS, JavaScript, and images can all be compressed to save download threads and bandwidth. The Telerik Ajax controls support this through some different things that we can do with the script manager. There's actually a pair of settings we can turn on, and it'll start to do this type of behavior with our JavaScript. The style manager will do the same thing with our CSS. Microsoft's ASP.NET framework supports this capability through the ASP.NET Bundles functionality. In this demo, we're going to take a look at bundling, compressing, and reducing static content for both ASP.NET Web Forms and MVC. Here I am in 4_bundle Ajax, and I've got a standard scheduler control placed on the screen. Let's take a look at just how much network resources are used when I request and paint this one control on the screen. It's one of our bigger controls. It's meant to really solve a problem for you and have a lot of capabilities in it. I expect there to be a lot of JavaScript and CSS to support this control. I've opened up my F12 developer tools and I'm on the network tab. Let me click refresh and let's see just how much content comes in. 22 requests just to paint this control on the screen. Starting with the base HTML, I've got 4 CSS sheets, and then I've got a lot of JavaScript that it loads. The final 2 requests support the Visual Studio browser link capabilities, so I can ignore those. So I have 20 requests in order to paint this control on the screen. Let's see what we can do to optimize that using the Telerik script manager. Here I am in 4_bundle Ajax. And I've got a script manager and a style sheet manager on this screen. I can tell these controls to start to combine their scripts, their static content, and compress them by using the enable script combine, enable style sheet combine, and output compression attributes. Let's go back over to Chrome and see how this impacted the number of requests and the total size of our page. 20 requests, and now I'm down to 9 requests. When I refresh again, you can see we're down to 9.2K transferred when those scripts are cached in memory. This is the efficient way we want to be able to deliver content because as you can see in the timeline on the right, we're not blocking while these things are being requested and painted on the screen. My CSS and JavaScript are requested at the same time, and all of that comes in and is painted on the screen at the same time. Let's see how we can do this now with ASP.NET MVC. I'm here in the default layout CSHTML page that's generated inside of a Kendo UI for MVC project. And there's a lot going on here. We see the styles.render, the scripts.render tag. It's there twice, one bringing in Modernizer, another time bringing in jQuery. And then I've got 8 lines of CSS links and JavaScript tags. Let's see how this affects the browser. You can see here when I first look at the page, I've got 17 requests, minus the bottom 3, which are all being used to support browser link, the jQuery map, the buffer hover icon, and the TPC check. The rest of this content takes a real long time to load, and you can see even there the Kendo all min file, it has to wait to be delivered, and the jQuery request at the top of this screen has to wait to be requested. It has to wait until some of the other CSS files have been delivered. We can do better than this. Let's take a look at how we can optimize this page. Let's bundle this up using the ASP.NET bundling mechanisms and make simpler Kendo UI content bundles. Over here in Bundle Config CS in the App Start folder, you can see on lines 30 through 44, I've created two bundles, one called Bundles Kendo and another one called CSS Kendo that contains all the JavaScript I need to run my page and all the CSS I need to run my page. Let's go back over to my layout and remove those extra elements that I don't need and trim down to just the new Kendo UI bundles that I've declared here. Now let's take a look at that MVC sample we were looking at earlier and make sure that it still runs properly. We've got it trimmed down to 5 requests. It reports 7 here because we also have 2 requests at the end to support browser link. Not bad. Everything comes in at the same time, and there's no waiting for the page to be painted. Let's take a look at our next tip. Using alternate renderings. This is one of the really neat things that you can start to do with your website, because we can start to use the .mobile page notation in MVC. Name your views .mobile.cshtml, and when MVC detects that a mobile device is making a request, instead of serving the normal .cshtml view page, the .mobile.cshtml page will be served. Similarly, if you use friendly URLs in ASP.NET Web Forms, you can get a .mobile.aspx page served when a .aspx page is requested. This will allow you to migrate your content to the new UI mode to support those other devices that you want to address. Finally, try using Kendo UI Mobile to provide adaptive renderings that work for every mobile device. It'll make things feel native on those devices, and your users will think your application is so cool because it looks and feels great on their device. In this demo, we're going to take a look at the alternate rendering capabilities with a cameo visit from Kendo UI Mobile. Here I am back in my MVC demos. This is my list of pirate hats. Yes, I'm selling pirate hats at Jeff's Cat Shelter, and they're being presented inside of a Kendo UI grid using MVC. Not bad, but let's see how we can present this content using a mobile optimized layout with Kendo UI Mobile and ASP.NET MVC and some alternate rendering. Here's my simple MVC list of hats that I've output. I'm using a Kendo grid model with the name hats. Let's turn this around and use this with Kendo UI Mobile now. MVC has built into it some device detection, and it will start to consume views that have .mobile in their name when a mobile device is requesting content. This even goes into the layout. Here is Layout Mobile CSHTML. I'm referencing the Content Delivery Network version of Kendo. You can see my Kendo UI Mobile layout. I have a view that has a title that comes out of my view bag title, where I would typically put the title to appear in the title tag in the head. I'm now going to output it here in my data title attribute. I specify a layout with another div, and then I need to conclude my page with some script to initialize the mobile application. Let's go back over to the mobile MVC page and see how that's implemented. To turn my list of hats from a grid into a mobile list view appropriate for displaying on a phone, I use the Kendo.MobileListView extension method. Once again, I'm passing in the name of hats. And now I pass in a template ID for how I want each one of my items to be presented. There is no default rendering for objects with this. We need to give it a little bit of a push and specify how our template should look. I do this with a standard Kendo template, specified in the script tag starting on line 9. With this in play, let's go back over to our page and take a look at how this is formatted once we start requesting content with Chrome's emulated browsers. I'll press F12 to bring up my console. I'll press Escape to bring up the bottom panel here. And this time, let's start with an iPhone 4. I'll click Emulate. And you can see immediately my browser changes size. Kendo UI hasn't reformatted this appropriately for me yet. I'll refresh so that we can engage the ASP.NET router with my new browser signature string and see how it responds. And now we have an interface that looks like it should appear on an iPhone 4. Kendo UI Mobile supports skins for all different types of mobile devices, including the latest iOS 7. We've even deployed a fix for iOS 8 that you'll see in nightly builds right now and in the quarterly update that'll be coming in July. Let's go over and see what this looks like with a Google Nexus. And refresh. And it's got that darker theme that we would expect on an Android device. Finally, let's choose the Windows Phone, a Nokia Lumia. And we'll refresh. And I've got that Metro look and feel with things slightly indented. Not bad. But this works great for MVC. Let's take a look at what we can do with web forms. I'll stop my emulation and go to 5 Mobile Ajax so that we can see what this looks like for a desktop browser. And I've got my Ajax grid and it looks fairly standard here. Let's reformat this as a list for a mobile device. We can do that with something called friendly URLs. In my route config, I specify on line 18, routes.enable friendly URLs, and my project can now handle mobile device detection for ASP.NET Web Forms. I can now place a mobileajax.mobile ASPX file, and this page will be executed when mobile Ajax is requested. This time, I'm outputting a list view with just a series of divs indicating the name and price of my hats. Let's see what happens when I change my signature string. So I'm going to tell the browser that I'm using a Lumia, and I'll refresh so that information is transmitted to the server. And now I get my list view. Not bad. Certainly works. But it'd be a lot better if I could get that Kendo UI mobile look and feel. Let me show you how we can do that real quick in ASP.NET Ajax. I've created another page here, 5 Ajax Mobile Kendo UI. I've included links and script references to the CDN for all of the Kendo UI mobile capabilities. I've added some style information for my body, my form, and HTML tags so that things are stretched to fill the whole screen. I've also included a meta viewport tag to make sure that the width of the browser is the same as the device width. And now I have a similar look and feel as to what I had in MVC. I have a data role view, and now I use an ASP list view to output my items using an unordered list tag and list item tags that are going to output in the format that I want. I defined a layout, and finally at the bottom, once again, I defined a new Kendo mobile application. This time, pointing to the ASP.NET form tag. Let's see how this looks. And now we get the same look and feel for a Lumia. And I'll go back to my iPhone 4. And it looks and feels like it belongs on an iPhone 4. The 5. And it looks good there too. So you have lots of options for how you want to implement this so that it works on all of your devices. And Telerik is there to support you, whether it's through Metro Touch themes so that you can deliver the content using standard ASP.NET controls, Kendo UI Mobile so you can make it look and feel native to those devices, and support for the Bootstrap framework so you can use whatever markup you want and make it responsive to fit on those devices. Let me go back to the slides and share with you a couple resources before we get done here. Here's where you can go to learn more about the UI for ASP.NET Ajax.
Thanks, Jeff. Hello, and welcome to the Telerik DevTools Q2 2014 online conference. The title of this session is Manage Documents Within Your .NET Apps. Let's jump straight in. As a quick introduction, my name is Michael Crump. I'm a Microsoft MVP, and I work at Telerik as a Senior Developer Advocate. You can find me on Twitter at mbcrump, or check out my personal blog at michaelcrump.net. We also have a couple of Telerik blogs covering a variety of our products, as well as general information that can be found at blogs.telerik.com and developer.telerik.com. Let's take a look at the roadmap for today. We'll begin with defining what is document processing. Then we'll take a look at our current solutions for document processing, as well as how to implement it in your app with the demo of each. We'll wrap things up with several resources and a Q&A. So what is document processing? So it's actually very simple. Document processing enables developers to embed, load, create, convert, and print documents directly within their apps, without the need of having Microsoft Office or any other external library installed on the client or the server. We provide APIs for processing the most common document formats, such as DocX, RTF, XLSX, CSV, and PDF. Document processing is available as part of the product at no additional cost. Right now, some of the functionality is in CTP or beta, and is only available for specific platforms. Let's take a quick look at this before diving into it further. So here is a breakdown of the library versus the platform. Let's take the very first one, which is RadPdfProcessing. So you'll see it's not available in Silverlight, but it is available as a CTP in WPF, ASP.NET, and WinForms. For RadWords processing, again, it's not available in Silverlight, but it is available as a beta in WPF, ASP.NET, and WinForms. For RadSpreadProcessing, it is official in the Q2 2014 release for all 4 platforms. RadPdfProcessing is a document processing library that enables your application to import and export files to and from PDF format. The document model is entirely independent from the UI and allows you to generate documents with different types of fonts, images, shapes, and more. It comes complete with an easy-to-use API for document generation and requires no external dependencies on the server. RadWords processing is a .NET library that enables users to effortlessly import and export files to and from some of the most commonly used formats. You can also enable your application's users to easily convert, generate, or modify rich text documents using the various formatted options and capabilities, including tables, inline and floating images, hyperlinks, and a variety of built-in styles and themes. The document model is completely independent from external libraries or UI. Users are able to process Microsoft Word supported documents even without having Microsoft Word or any other external library installed on the client or the server. Finally, RadWords processing is optimized to offer unmatched performance with virtually no limitations on the amount of data being processed. RadSpreadProcessing is a document processing library that enables your applications to easily import and export files to and from the most common spreadsheet file format, including XLSX, CSV, and TXT. They can also convert files from one format to another. RadSpreadProcessing comes with more than 100 built-in formulas. covering a broad range of categories from financial formulas to logical formulas. So users are able to process Microsoft Excel supported documents even without having Microsoft Excel or any other external library installed on the client or the server. The intuitive API allows you to swiftly generate documents from scratch. Let's go ahead and take a look now at several demos. Okay, we are inside of Visual Studio 2013, and I have went ahead and installed the Q2 2014 bits. We are working with a XAML project, so this is actually a WPF application, and I have went ahead and just stubbed out an application for us where you don't have to watch me type. Before we dive into the actual demos, let me just go ahead and kind of set the stage for what we're going to be talking about today. So we're going to be looking at RadWords processing, and then RadSpreadProcessing, and then RadPdfProcessing. And then a demo of each one of these. So to convert the document, I'm going to be showing you how to convert from one file format to another. Generate document is going to allow us to generate a document completely on the fly. And then we have an integration demo where I'm going to be using Rad Grid View, and we're going to export its contents out to a document that will be used. So if we first take a look at the solution and we take a look at how this project is laid out, you can see we have references, and underneath the references I've added in references to everything that we're going to use today. Obviously you don't have to add all of these in if you're not going to be using them. Navigate to your browser and simply go to docs.telerik.com, and from there select the product that you're interested in and scroll down to the bottom and you will find the control and click on the Getting Started page. Here is an example of Telerik UI for WPF, and here I am inside of the Getting Started page for the RadWords processing. And as you can see here, it says here is a list of the assemblies that contain the RadWords processing functionality and need to be referenced in your project. You're just going to want to make sure that those have been added to your project. From there, I have a demos folder, and if we expand the demos folder, you can see that I have a file helper, and then we have a XAML file that corresponds to each one of the buttons that has been listed on the page here. So for the convert document, it's going to be simply this one called words convert document.xaml. And the reason that I do that is that if you want to duplicate any of the functionality that you have seen in the demos in your own code, you can simply go to the demos folder and then whichever demo you enjoyed the most and simply click on the XAML file or the XAML.cs file and be able to examine that code snippet. We'll go ahead and collapse the demos folder, and you'll see underneath sample data I have just a couple of images that we're going to use in this demo, as well as I have a products.cs, which is going to be some of the sample data that we're going to use. So with that being said, I'm going to switch back over to our main window.xaml, and we're going to take a look at our very first demo, which is going to be convert document. If we navigate to our demos folder, again we're going to go to words convert document, and I'm just going to double click on the XAML file where you can see it. So I have a button that says open document, and then I just have a text block that says extension to save as, and then we're going to use again another Telerik control, which is just a rad combo box, and we're going to add in docx, rtf, and then txt. And then finally we have a Save Document button. So let's go ahead and look at the code behind file. As you can tell, we've went ahead and we've added in a couple of different using statements. These using statements are going to be required in order to convert this document. So if we scroll down, you'll see that I'm going to begin by adding a private read-only list and then an I format provider. So this represents the interface for the format providers. And then a rad flow document. So this hosts the flow document content. And I'm just going to give this the name of providers. Then I'm going to declare a rad flow document and just give it the name of document. This is where we're going to actually store our stream. And then we have a string called file name, which is just going to hold the file name of the file that the user has opened. After we initialize the component, you can see I'm just calling a this.providers, and I'm going to be passing in a new docx format provider, RTF format provider, and then a txt format provider. If we scroll down, you'll probably remember that we only had two buttons on our screen, one to open the file and one to save the file. So to open the file, we're using the standard open file dialog. We're going ahead and we're setting it a filter. We're going to be filtering just on docx, RTF, and then txt, and we'll also display all the files. We're going to set the index, the filter index, to 1. And then we're going to check and see if dialog.showDialog is equal to true. Then we're going to get the extension, which we're just going to call a path.getExtension on our dialog.filename. And then using the iFormat provider, radflow document, provider equals this.providers. We're going to check to see if it is a supported extension. And then we're going to compare the string and make sure that it is a supported string. If the provider is not equal to null, we're going to use a stream and we're going to use dialog.openFile and then simply provide this.document equals provider.import stream, and then this.filename equals path.getFilename on our dialog.filename. We have a little bit of exception error handling that you can see down below. So that will handle our open document button. And then we have our save document button, which starts to use our file helper, which we haven't seen before. So you can see we're just simply using file helper.saveDocument. We're passing in the document. And then our combo box that we added to the screen, we're using cb file format.text. So again, we're passing in the document that the user has opened, as well as the file format that they want the document exported to. So let's take a look at the file helper. So in the file helper, if I scroll down, you can see we have save document, and we're looking at a radflow document of document, and then a string, which is the selected format. We're going to go ahead and set the format provider to null at the beginning, and then use a switch statement to check to see if the case was a docx, RTF, or txt, and then use either a docx format, an RTF format provider, or a txt format provider. If it's null, then we're just going to return out of this method. Otherwise, we're going to go into our save file dialog, and again, we're just going to set up a filter here, just like we've done previously. Check to see if our dialog.showDialog is equal to true, and then using the var stream equals dialog.openFile, we can just simply call formatProvider.export the document and then the stream. Let's take a look at the very first sample. I'm going to go to Convert Document. I'm going to select Open Document, and you can see that we have a document in our temp folder that simply has sample document. I'm going to double click on that. So now that document has been opened. So I'm going to select extension to save as. It was docx. I can obviously save it back to that, but that really wouldn't make a lot of sense. Let's try changing it to RTF. And now I'm going to click Save Document, and I'm going to name this Words Processing RTF, and now I'm going to click the Save button, and if I go over to my temp folder and I double click on Words Processing RTF, you can see this is the document that we just converted it to. This was the sample document that we were just working with, so you can see that it converted very nicely. Let's go ahead and let's change that to txt, and we'll click Save Document again. From here, I'm just going to name this Words Processing TXT, and then click on the Save button. Again, I'll bring over my Words Processing TXT, and it's opened up this document. And as you can see, it has actually converted the docx file that we had into a text document. And let's take a look at our second demo, which was our words generate document. So from here, this is another sample, and again, we're just going to simply give the user the ability to save this as a format of docx, RTF, or TXT, and then it's going to generate the document. Let's look at the code behind for this file. You can see that right off the bat, I'm going to go ahead and declare a green color, which is going to be just simply a themable color. And we're going to give this a color.fromArGB. And the user has the ability to click on the Generate Documents button. And when they click on that, it's going to simply call radFlow document and give it the name of document, this.create document, which is this method that we'll look at in just a moment. And then finally, it declares a selected format as a string, and it puts in the value coming from cb file format.txt. And then again, we're using our file helper to just save the document like we used previously. So taking a look now at the create document, we're instantiating a new radFlow document and giving it the name of document, a radFlow document editor, passing in document, and then giving it the name of editor. And here's where we can begin to start setting some type of paragraph formatting if you would like. In this instance, it's just alignment.justified. The body of this email message is going to begin adding in stuff like Dear Telerik user, and then finally we're using a run, and inside this run it's going to allow us to use special things such as maybe we wanted to underline. So in this instance we're going to underline does not require. And if we scroll down, you can see that you can begin to start adding in things like font weight, font style, underline dot pattern equals underline pattern dot single. Maybe you want to double there. Font size, and then the foreground color, which was the color that we used earlier or we described earlier. If we scroll on down, we can also start inserting a hyperlink if we would like to. So here is just a hyperlink to our public forums. And then down at the bottom you can see I'm going to call this.create signature on the editor. So let's scroll down and look at that. So on the create signature, and you can see that we're going to begin by inserting a table with this one row and two columns. After we've done that, we can go ahead and set up the width. And then we're going to add a paragraph with an image here. And we have a helper class that is located inside of our file helper. And inside of that, we're just going to get a sample resource stream to our logo, which is our Telerik logo.png. And then finally, we can create the cell with the name and the position. So if we go ahead and run this application, I'm going to go ahead and click Start. And we click Generate Document. We're going to generate a docx this time. I'll select Generate Document, and I'll give this the name of Generate Document docx, and then I'll click Save. And if we go ahead and we double click on our Generate Document, you can see that it generated this document exactly like we specified here. Taking a look now at the integration demo, we have a rad grid view on our screen as well as a text block, and then we have a Telerik rad combo box as well as a Telerik rad button to generate the document. So the rad grid view, we're going to export the contents of this out using words processing. So if we switch to our code behind file, we can see that we are declaring products, which is just a list of sample data.product. This is just my sample data. So we have a loaded event handler, and we're going to generate 100 items. And then we're going to, after we've generated the 100 items, we're going to add that to the item source of our rad grid view. So on our button click event, which is going to be for generate document, we're going to be doing the same exact thing that we did in our words generate sample, except for the only difference is obviously going to be in our create document method. So in our create document method, we're passing in rad grid view and then the grid, and we're going to begin by getting a list of the 4 different columns. After we do that, we're going to declare a rad flow document. We're going to create and style a table, and then we're going to begin by exporting the header row. So we're going to check to see if the grid.show column headers is equal to true, and if so, we're going to come inside of this and we're going to set up our table row, and then for each of our columns we're going to add those to the header row.cells.add table cell. After that's complete, we have a this.add_data_rows, which is passing in a table, a grid.items, and then a columns. And if we scroll down, you can see that from here we're going to set up a themable color of black, and then we have 100 items in our items.count, and we're going to add all of those to our table rows. And one thing to note here is that our header is going to be obviously of the color of blue, and then for each one of the items that we add, it's going to be a color of black. So for time's sake, I'm just going to go ahead and I'm going to run the application. I'm going to hit start. We'll click on integration demo. You can see our data listed here. We have our ID, we have name, we have unit price, and then we have date. Again, I'm going to save this as a docx. Click on generate document, and then this is going to be simply called words integration docx, and then we're going to hit the save button. I'm going to bring over my temp folder again. You can see that it has exported what we had in our grid view to a docx format. We're going to take a look at RadSpreadProcessing. We have already covered a big majority of this in the words convert document and words generate document and words integration. The only thing here is that we're going to be working primarily with XLSX, CSV, and TXT format, but a majority of this is the same. So this was the document that we first started with and we first saw in our words convert document.xaml. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to switch to the code behind file. The only thing that you're going to see different inside of this is that we're now using a private workbook, and then our providers is now iWorkbook format provider. Everything else is identical, the file name as well. And underneath the providers, we're now using the XLSX provider, CSV, and then TXT format provider. On our open document, we've changed the filter just to filter on those three file formats that I talked about earlier. Everything from this line forward is identical, except for when we get down to the save document. Instead of FileHelper.save document, we're now going to save the workbook. So if we go back to our file helper and we scroll down, the thing that you're going to see here is we're going to have save workbook. Now we're going to be passing in a workbook, which is going to be our document, and then a string, which is the selected format. So we use an iWorkbook format provider, and then for XLSX, we can just use the XLSX format provider. CSV, we're actually going to just call a workbook format providers manager.get provider by name, CSV format provider. And then I'm just going to go ahead and set up this has headers row to equal to true. And then for TXT, we're going to use the TXT format provider. Everything else is absolutely the same here. I can go ahead and I can hit the start button and we can launch our application. We're going to click on convert document. I'm going to go ahead and open a document first. We're going to select this sample document. We're going to change the format provider to be a CSV. We're going to click on save document, and I'm just going to give this the name of generate document CSV, and then we're going to click on save. So now that that has been saved, I'm going to go ahead and open the original file, and I'm going to put it on the screen, and then I'm going to open our CSV file, and I'm going to display it on the screen as well. So you can see this was the original document, which was a XLSX file, which had the rich formatting here, and you can see we converted that into a CSV file. and all of our data that we had here is actually showing up over here as well. Now that we just finished working with converting a document, let's look at generating a document. Again, we're going to begin with the same UI that we've been working with in the past. If we look at the code behind file, again we're using our sample data.product, and we're just giving this the name of products, which is going to be a list. And then if we scroll down, we have a loaded event handler, and we're going to set our products to our sample data.products.getSpreadData20.2 list. So basically this is just going to return 20 random items to our products list. When they click on the generate document button, we're going to again declare workbook equals this.createWorkbook, and then we're going to use our file helper as we've used in the past. So under create workbook, after we've added a new workbook, we're going to add a sheet, which is going to be a worksheet, and then we're going to set that to an active worksheet. And then we have a method here that's called prepare invoice document, which we'll look at in just a moment. And then we're going to iterate over all of the different products that we have. So you're going to see we have a product name, we have a quantity, we have a unit price, and then we have a subtotal. And if we look at the prepare invoice document, which I'll let you examine later, each one of these items, such as invoice, item, quantity, unit sold, subtotal, is going to be adding that to the worksheet. And then it's also going to be setting some stuff like some colors. And then we have a total that you'll see down here. And then finally, it's going to be setting a value on one of the cells to the sum of all of the items. So let's go ahead and let's run the application. I'm going to hit start. We're going to click generate document. I'm going to save this as an Excel SV file. We'll give this the name of spread integration. We'll hit save. So feel free to look at the code once the webinar is over, and if you have any other questions regarding how this was styled. While we're here, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to look at the integration demo. So again, I'm going to click on integration demo. You can see we have our data. We have 100 data rows listed here. I'm going to save this as an XLSX, so I'm going to click generate document, and I'm just going to give this the name of spread grid view. I'm going to click save. Again, if you want to learn more about how this was generated, feel free to take a look at the sample code. And we're going to go ahead and wrap things up with RadPdfProcessing. In this sample, we're going to generate a very simple PDF document. So as you can see, we have a window and we have one button. If we look at the code behind file, you can see that we are calling out and instantiating a new PDF format provider. We're setting the image quality to high. We're using just the standard save file dialog, as well as setting up the filter like we've done in the past. Once they've opened the file, we're going to actually be calling document equals this.createDocument. And if we scroll down, we can see that from here we're just setting up the document by using radFixDocument, and then we're adding a page. We're using the fixed content editor, and from there we are starting another using statement for editor.beginText, and we're going to start manipulating some things like the font size, the font family, and then the font style and the font weight. So RadPdfProcessing will have a different font, as well as it will be italic and bold. And then for the next line, we're going to be using another font family, and that's just going to finish out what RadPdfProcessing actually is. And finally, the format provider.export will export this document out to the PDF file format. So let's go ahead and let's run the application. I'm going to hit start. I'm going to generate a document. We'll just name this generate PDF. We'll hit save, and then I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to open the document, and you can see that it is performing exactly as we expected. So let's wrap things up with some resources. You can go to telerik.com/products, and you'll be able to find Telerik UI for WPF, ASP.NET Ajax, WinForms, and Silverlight, along with our other products that we make. You can check out the documentation at docs.telerik.com. Also, if you need some support while working with document processing, you can simply go to telerik.com/support. Thank you for taking the time to listen. Again, trial downloads are available at telerik.com for whichever platform you choose to use document processing with. Now over to Sam, who's going to introduce us to 3 brand new controls for ASP.NET Ajax. Take it away, Sam.
Alright, thank you Michael, and thanks Jeff for getting us started off. Hopefully you're having fun, and you're just as excited as we are as we unpack some of the new things for you in DevCraft of Q2 2014. I want to bring you back to the Telerik UI for ASP.NET world and share some of the really exciting things that we have coming for you. Now, before we get to the exciting part, let me introduce myself. I'm Samati Basu, I just go by Sam, and I work as a developer advocate for Telerik. I have some of my contact information up here if you want to get hold of me, like email or start with my blog. But the quickest and easiest way might be Twitter, where I'm just at SAMIDIP. So let's get started. Now, before we unpack what's new, I want to take a small step back. It amazes me how ubiquitous the web has become. We all have a dizzying array of devices in our lives, starting from smartphones to tablets to laptops all the way up to your TV. But the one thing that is common is the web, and that remains your best bet for content delivery if you're looking for the broadest possible reach. And the tooling for building the web has also come a long way. On the server side, we have all the advancements in ASP.NET Stack. On the client side, we have the flexibility of JavaScript and popular frameworks like jQuery and Kenda UI. Now, as Jeff pointed out in the beginning, whether you want to go out of the box in ASP.NET or utilize some of the mobile-friendly features and controls that we are building for you in the Telerik control suite, it should be very easy for you to go responsive with your web applications. And with the tooling that we have today, there is just no excuse for not making a beautiful web that just works seamlessly across all devices. So while on one hand we are developing these lightweight, mobile-friendly web applications that work across all devices, there is also no denying the fact that on the other hand, the web remains a huge vehicle for delivery of enterprise applications. I'm sure a big percentage of you are enterprise application developers, and you are building complex line of business applications for your enterprise. Now, these enterprise applications that you guys are building could be internal or even external facing, but what's constant is this heavy demand for rich user interactions and extreme performance in the new virtual machine, the user's browser. So, in this quarter, we are going back to our roots and empowering you, the enterprise web developer. I'm about to show you several brand new controls and framework pieces in the Telerik UI for ASP.NET Suite. Hopefully, you'll see the effort that we have put in helping you build even more richer and more interactive modern web applications. Curious? Let's dive in. Now, the first control we're going to begin with is the brand new Rad map. Think of it as the most comprehensive, extremely performant mapping solution for your web applications built with Telerik UI for ASP.NET. If you're dealing with geographical or geospatial information, the Rad map is going to be your best friend, helping you visualize your data and providing customizations. For your users, they can zoom and pan to any corner of the earth, be it from a keyboard and a mouse on a traditional desktop or laptop, or touch support if they happen to pull up your application on a tablet device. You'll realize that the Rad map control has been engineered with rich geospatial functionality built in, and it helps you create amazing user experiences. You can customize the control with any number of layers, markers, shapes, tooltips, and much more. Now, something we are really proud of is the Rad map's support and compliance towards geospatial standards. We completely support protocols like OSGeo, which is the open source geospatial foundation, and GeoJSON, which is a way for representing geospatial information through JSON. You'll realize that our support and compliance in the Rad map simply leads to more plug-and-play opportunities for you. I'll demo some of this as we get along. Now, those of you who are building HTML5 and JavaScript-based web applications and using our open source and popular Kenda UI libraries, you might notice some similarities of the Rad map to the Kenda UI map. This is no coincidence. It is actually sharing some of the underpinnings, and we are simply bringing over the brilliance of the Kenda UI map control to the Telerik UI for ASP.NET World. So moving along, here are some features of the Rad map control that you'll absolutely love. We have support for any number of layers on top of your mapping control. The tile layer, for example, helps you do plug and play. You can swap your mapping provider to anybody who would support the OSGeo format. For your markers and shapes on top of your maps, you can roll with the built-in ones or create your own custom ones. And for all of these layers, we offer easy and seamless data binding both on the server side and on the client side. So now let's take a look at some sample usages of the Rad map control. The screenshot here on the left shows you some of the built-in layer functionality that the control exposes. You have your navigator and zoom controls built in, which allows the user to zoom and pan around. You have your custom shapes, you have your markers with tooltips on it, and you have your attribution towards your mapping provider. The screenshot on the right hand side shows you more custom shapes, this time circles, and a different zooming level altogether. So the Rad map offers you extreme flexibility to display and visualize your geospatial information. We'll look at more of these in detail in our demos. Okay, so the next new control that we're going to talk about is the Rad diagram. Now, from my web developer background, this is just mind-blowing with the kind of opportunities and interactions it opens up in your browser. Now, the Rad diagram control has been in beta for a couple of months, and now it's entirely baked in and ready for your prime time. What it is a comprehensive diagramming solution for Telerik UI for ASP.NET. The Rad diagram control has been engineered to offer rich user interactions in your web applications. We are talking about putting shapes and connectors on top of your diagramming canvas, and the user gets to resize, rotate, or move around any of the UI elements that you put on your diagram. Do you enjoy Microsoft Visio on your desktop? Well, we are talking about building Visio-like immersive experiences running entirely in your browser. The user has both mouse and touch support, and he can cut, copy, paste, or do any of the things that you normally expect from a desktop application entirely in your web application running on a browser. Pretty incredible if you ask me. So how are we pulling this off? Turns out the answer lies in HTML5 semantic rendering and the use of SVG, which is scalable vector graphics. That's what provides the responsiveness and the extreme user interaction that we're shooting for. The Rad diagram control comes equipped with several flexible layout systems built in. Things like hierarchical trees, both horizontal and vertical, mind maps, and much more. A lot of the essential shapes and UI elements that you'll commonly put on diagrams come built in, but it's just as easy to create custom ones. So moving along, what are some of the features of the Rad diagram control that you'll absolutely love? Well, it's 2014, and you expect any modern control, especially the ones coming from Telerik, to simply work cross-browser along with touch support. So all this rich user interaction you're building, it simply works no matter what device or browser the user brings to the table. Also, the UI elements, which are the crux of the diagram, they can be easily created on the fly using data binding both on the server and on the client side. Another really nice feature is the UI elements and the skeleton which makes up the diagram can be imported or exported out as JSON. So we can export out a diagram in all its entirety as JSON, but at the same time we can import some JSON and create a diagram on the fly simply in our browser. So now let's take a look at some of the sample usages of the Rad diagram. You can envision that the Rad diagram control is really good at creating mind maps, organizational charts, flowcharts, and a whole host of other types of diagrams. The user can add, delete, and edit each one of the UI elements that make up the diagram for the ultimate user experience. We'll look at some of these interactions in our demos. Now, the last new control that we're going to cover today is the Rad Gantt control, and this we are launching in beta initially. The Rad Gantt control essentially allows you to visualize your project schedule entirely in a browser through a web application. Now, if there are any PMs in the audience, you are going to love this. If you are used to Microsoft Project or any other type of project management software for your desktop world, you will appreciate the visualization and the level of detail that we're now bringing to the web. Now, just as you expect from any Gantt chart, the Rad Gantt control allows you to visualize the different components of the project. So you get a high-level visual inside the work breakdown structure of a project. The details, like all the tasks, when they're starting, when they're ending, their durations, their percentage completions, and dependencies on other tasks, as well as high-level project details like the starting dates and the ending dates, the deadlines, the resources, and the milestone. You get a view of all of that through 3 customizable views of the Rad Gantt chart: the day, the month, and the week views. Now, just as you'd expect from any hard-hitting control, the Rad Gantt is here to impress with its features. You have complete flexibility and control over some of the date formats and the details used inside the control. Things like the starting and the beginning dates of the work week, the number of hours worked each day, and so on. And all of these details are bubbled up through easy data binding both on the client and on the server side. Now, let's take a quick look at a sample usage of the Rad Gantt control. As you'd expect, the Rad Gantt control is here to help you visualize project management data. On the left-hand side, you have all of the task details, their names, their dependencies, their starting and ending times, and prioritizations. On the right-hand side, you have a timeline with connected bar charts which visualize all of the tasks in your project, along with their percent completes and dependencies on other tasks. We'll look at a demo of this in just a minute. So, this quarter, you are getting 3 brand new heavy-hitting controls in your Telerik UI for ASP.NET Suite. Each one of them engineered so that you can deliver the best possible user experience in your line of business applications. Now, before we jump into demos, there is one more thing I want to show you, and that is the Rad Client Data Source. Now, this new client data source is actually a framework piece in Telerik UI for ASP.NET Ajax, and it is perfectly shareable between all of our UI controls in the suite. Now, when it comes to server-side data bindings, we have never been lacking. With your Telerik UI controls, you have always been able to bind them to any number of data sources on the server side, including all of the ASP.NET data sources. But client-side data binding is something you most commonly see in the JavaScript world. Turns out, there are some unique advantages to client-side data binding, not to mention being incredibly performant. A client-side data source acts as a proxy, a bridge between our UI controls and your data source. And this could be anything from SQL, XML, JSON data sources, OData, you name it. And this flexibility probably explains why the Kendo UI client data source in the Kendo UI library is so hugely popular in the JavaScript world. And now we are bringing over all of that goodness to Telerik UI ASP.NET Ajax, along with server wrappers so you can define your Rad client data source along with declarative data bindings. If your data backend supports it, the Rad client data source will offer features like automatic CRUD operations, sorting, filtering, and ordering. It is very easy to configure and integrates with all of the UI controls in the ASP.NET Ajax suite. This is something we are very excited about. I know Jeff talked about it. I'll make sure to point out the usage of Rad client data sources in my demos. Now, I know exactly what you're thinking. I'm talking entirely too much, isn't it? Well, why don't we see some of these new controls and framework pieces in action? Time for some fun demos. Now, for our demos, I'm in my favorite place to hang out as a .NET developer, and that's Visual Studio. To showcase some of the new controls and features that we talked about, I'm going to demonstrate an oversimplified ASP.NET Web Forms application, just to highlight the new pieces. But before we start, let's make sure you're on the same page. How I got here is quite simply File, New, Project, and I picked the web template in the Telerik placeholder and started with the Telerik C# web application. Now, of course, you don't have to go this route. You can begin with any vanilla ASP.NET project and upconvert your web project to include the Telerik bits in your references. Now, if you're not seeing these Telerik templates in Visual Studio, you're going to make me a very sad man, because what it means is you're not utilizing the Telerik UI for ASP.NET Ajax control suite, and you're missing out on so much of this goodness that we are bringing to the table just for you. Now, hopefully this webinar shows you the promise, and if you're an enterprise developer, you owe it to yourself to check out the Telerik suite. A free trial never hurt anybody. Now, back in my Visual Studio project, which I've already created, you'll notice that the Telerik templates essentially gave us a few DLLs, which are already referenced in my project. Now, keep in mind, for all of these newer controls and features that I'm about to show you, you do need the latest bits before they'll start working. To get the latest bits, what you need is the Telerik DevCraft Q2 2014 release, which went live I think late last week. Now, if you are already using Telerik UI for ASP.NET inside of Visual Studio, you'll be prompted for an update. Alternatively, you could use the really handy Telerik control panel to keep track of all of your Telerik products in one place, and all of your updates show up right here. Let's go ahead and run my simple demo application. You'll notice that it's running on localhost on my IIS Express. So what you see is a simple dashboard. It has a background, it has some footer, and essentially it has 3 links to get me to the pages so I can demonstrate the map, the diagram, and the Gantt controls. Back in my Visual Studio project, you'll realize that this common look and feel of all of the pages in my demo application come from a master page, and that's right here. Now this serves a bigger purpose. The master page is where I get to define my doc type, HTML, head, body, and any of the common markup that's required across all of my pages all in one spot. Notice how I pull in the Telerik Rad Stylesheet Manager and the much needed Rad Script Manager all in one place for all of my pages. This little ASP content placeholder, that's where all of the child pages inject their content. Pretty standard stuff. So let me fire up my app again so that we can take a look at some of these new controls one at a time. So here goes. We are back running inside of IE on localhost, and we see my dashboard again. Let me click my little map link here. You'll notice that I take you to a page called map.aspx, and this is where we get to see the new Telerik Rad Map control in all its glory. There are several little links here up on the top of the page which represent the different features of the Rad Map that I want to showcase. There are essentially little div tags inside the page which I show and hide as needed. Now, you remember that I had mentioned that Rad Map supports customizable layers for its content. Well, let's begin with the tile layer first. Turns out the tile layer offers ultimate plug and play. It allows you to swap the mapping service provider, the layer which is underneath the control, based on whoever is supporting the OSGeo specs. So you'll notice that we begin with the OpenStreetMaps first. Let me change that to OpenCycleMap. Next, let's go to Bing Maps. You'll notice that the geospatial data, the mapping service layer under the control, changes entirely as we swap the provider. So, to understand what's going on in our Rad Map control as we switch the service provider around, let's take a look at some code. I'm in my map.aspx webpage and looking at some markup. Here's my Telerik Rad combo box. That's the dropdown which showed us all the available options for service providers that supported the OSGeo specs. Next up, here's the Telerik Rad Map, and this is your first look at the Rad Map control. It looks just like any other ASP.NET control in your markup, and it has a whole bunch of properties. Notice that I'm using the center settings to kind of center my map on a certain latitude and longitude. This particular lat long happens to be in the center of the United States, somewhere over Missouri, I think. Now, I do not have any layered settings, and that magic happens to be in the code behind. Now, let's take a look at some more details in our code behind file. You'll see that I'm writing a little code in the page load function, and I can afford to do this because my Rad combo box dropdown has its auto postback property set to true. So every time we change the service provider, the page does an automatic postback. It doesn't flicker because it's inside a Rad Ajax panel, but we get to respond to the page load event. Now, we are reading the combo box's value and text based on whatever the user selected, and then we are invoking this getMapLayer function, which essentially returns a map layer. This we simply add to the layers collection in our Rad Map control. Now, let's take a look at the getMapLayer function. It gets the provider and the provider name from the combo box values. If it's anything other than Bing, we set the map layer's type to tile, and we set the appropriate attribution, so we're giving credit to the service provider. If it's Bing, Bing Maps API needs you to register to get yourself a service key, and we set the type to Bing. That's it. That's how you switch around the service provider underneath your Rad Map control. Now, let's switch back to our demo, and the next feature I'm going to show you is the marker layer. Let me click on this corresponding link. Now, you see the same Rad Map control. It's loading a different service provider underneath, but now you see a single marker on top of the map. When I hover over it, it says London, UK. Let's take a look how we do this in our code. Now, here's the corresponding markup in my map.aspx. You'll realize that I have a Telerik Rad Map here, just as you'd expect. The center settings here are much more generic, so the map appears kind of zoomed out and we can see the whole world. The layers collection is where we add our custom layers, and the single layer that this guy has is a map layer of the type tile, This is what gets us the service provider. Next up, I add a markers collection and add a single map marker to it. This one is of the type pin target and has the location settings with the coordinates of London, UK. The title here is what shows up in our tooltip. Now, back in our demo, what good is static data? We need some dynamic content, and that comes from data binding, which is our next feature. Let me click on that link. So now we have another rad map control show up with the world map underneath. But now we have a whole bunch of markers show up on the world map. These happen to be all the Telerik offices worldwide. If I hover over this one here, that's our Boston office. This happens to be Sofia, Bulgaria. Now all of these markers along with the tooltips are actually being dynamically generated and put on the map. Let's take a look how. So here's the corresponding markup in my ASPX page. This is the Telerik rad map control. And the one thing that's different here is we are listening to this event called onItemDataBound, and I'll tell you in just a second as to why. Inside my rad map, I have my layers collection with a single map layer of the type tile, and that's our service provider. But then we have our data bindings, and this is where we are defining how the markers are supposed to bind to some data. Here are some marker bindings, and notice how I'm binding it to the shape, the title, the latitude, and the longitude. So where is it getting this data from? Turns out that's in the code behind. Now, back in my C# code, you'll notice that in my page load function, I'm grabbing the RadMap controller, which is RadMap4, and setting the data source property to this function called getData. And finally, I'm doing a data bind on it. So what is this function getData doing? Let's take a look. Aha, now you notice that the getData function is actually returning a data set. Now the data set is comprised of this data table. And all of these columns in the data table actually correspond to all of the exact data bindings that we looked at in our markup. Next, we create a whole bunch of rows corresponding to all the Telerik offices worldwide and return that back to the map. So that's how, when we do a data bind on the map gets all its data and is able to put the markers on it. Now, the last piece of code to show you in the code behind is the RadMap's ItemDataBound event handler. Turns out every marker before it's been put on the map is been data bound, and we can listen in on this ItemDataBound event multiple times. We grab the marker in question and then we try reading the underlying data row view, which is the exact data row that that particular marker is actually being bound to. And that's how we can get the corresponding country, city, and address of the Telerik office in question. Next, we set the tooltipsettings.content property of the marker to a simple string, which comes from a template to which we pass along the country, city, and address. And that template happens to be a set of div tags, and that's how we get custom tooltips on our markers. Now, I'm back in my markup, and let me show you an alternative way of rendering the same markers on the map. What we saw in our C# code was server-side binding, and that's always going to be there for you. But remember I promised to show you the right client data source? This is it, and it's super cool. What if you wanted to do all that marker binding on the client side? What if you wanted to hook it up to a web service and fetch some data and do the binding on the client side? Well, that's what the Rad client data source is for. It is a client-side data source, but what we have here is the server-side wrapper. Inside of it, we define a data source, and in this particular case, we define it as a web service data source setting. So we are asking it to go to a web service and fetch some JSON data. Now, in my case, I'm faking it. Because I don't want to hook it up to a service, I actually have my markers data right here in the project in my data folder, which is sitting right out here. So let's take a look at our markers data. Now, the data in this local file looks just like the JSON representation of the Telerik office data which we had added in our C# code. So it's the same data set. Now back in our markup, we can skip the data bindings, and all we have to do is add another map layer to the layers collection, but this time of the type marker, set the shape to pin target, and more importantly, set the client data source ID to the rad client data source that we have just defined, and mark the corresponding location field so the markers can get their lats and longs. That's how simple it is to hook up the markers with client-side data binding. Back in our app, let's look at the last demo with rad maps. Just as we can put markers on a map, we can also put custom shapes on the map. But wouldn't it be nice if we can combine these custom layers, like putting shapes and maps together? That's exactly what the cross-layer demo is all about. So let me click on it. What you see in this demo is a map which is centered on Rome, and the markers are showing all the nearby attractions. The white line is actually a shape which is showing a walking route in between the attractions. So multiple layers in action. Back in our code, let me show you how to achieve this cross-layer integration with simply markup. What I have defined here are two RAD client data sources, one for routes and one for markers. Both of them have been configured to read JSON, but in a specific GeoJSON format. I'm faking a web service here since the JSON is actually living as text files in my local directory. Now next up in our code is the actual RAD map control. Notice how its layers collection has three sets of layers. First is the map layer of the type tile, that's our service provider. Next is a map layer of the type shape. And thirdly, there is a map layer of the type markers. Notice how the shape and the marker map layers are hooked up to their corresponding client data sources. And that's how easy it is to have cross-layer integration on the RAD map control. So this was a quick look at the brand new Telerik RAD map control. Exciting stuff if you ask me. Let's move on. So I'm back on my dashboard. Let's get to the diagram demos. And voila! What you have here is the diagram in Canvas, and you can put any number of shapes and connectors on it. Notice here that I have a rectangle, couple of circles, and a polygon, and there is a parent-child relationship between the elements, and that's how the connectors are lined up. Now, for your end user, an ultimate interaction model is built in. On any of the UI elements here, I can select, I can cut, copy, paste, I can rotate, I can drag it around, I can double-click to change the text, and so on. So back in Visual Studio, let me show you some markup on how to get this done. Up front, I have the Telerik RAD diagram control, and it has a shapes collection to hold all the shapes and a connections collection to hold all the connections. For my shapes, I'm just defining them up front in my markup. There's a parent, there are a couple of child elements. Notice that the first few have a type, then that's a predefined shape, and then the last one has a path, which is a custom shape. And then in my connections collection, I have all the Telerik diagram connections defined, including the parent to child from two settings. Okay, so the next feature we're going to look at are the flexible layouts. So let's go to the demo. I gotta be honest with you, the first time I saw this, I was like, wow, you can do this in browser. So what I have here is a simple diagram with a bunch of nodes, no labels on it, but then here's a drop down. This is a tree down that we're looking at. I'm trying to show you the layouts. Let's go to tree up. Now let's go to the mind map horizontal. You notice how fluidly the diagram changes on the fly in the client side. So back in our Visual Studio markup, here's my Telerik RAD diagram, and it has just a bunch of shapes and connectors. The interesting piece of code here is this Telerik RAD drop-down list, which is a drop-down of all the different flexible layouts supported. Notice that we're listening in on the item selected event on the client side. Then we have a little bit of JavaScript that gets us the reference to the diagram in our DOM, but notice we're picking it up as a Kendo UI widget because that's what it is under the covers. Now, here's a little bit of JavaScript code that does the magic on the client side. Here's our event handler. We are simply going to read the type and the subtype of the flexible layout from the drop-down list and change the diagram's layout accordingly. Pretty simple. So the last RAD diagram feature I want to show you is data binding. So let's go to that demo. What we have here is like a tennis tournament with players and rounds until we have a winner. Hey, Nadal wins all the time, right? So back in Visual Studio, let me show you some server-side data binding. My markup is one line of code to instantiate the RAD diagram. Everything else has been done in the code behind. So scrolling down a little bit in my code, this is where I'm instantiating my data. I have a player class and I have a round class, and I'm creating several color-coded players. And finally, you notice that I'm creating the shapes for each round individually and then connecting the rounds. Keep in mind, this is server-side binding. If I had the JSON for the entire tennis tournament, I can bind this to the RAD diagram entirely on the client side using the RAD client data source. Now, speaking of JSON, let's go back to our demo. One really nice feature of the RAD diagram is I can export out the data content underlying the diagram as JSON. Let me hit this button here. And what you have here is pure JSON coming straight out of the diagram. And here's the little JavaScript code that does the magic. We can get a reference to the diagram and you just call save on it. This gets us the JSON, which we can serialize and finally show it in our text box. Now, not only can we export JSON, we can also import JSON in and create the diagram on the fly. How cool is that? So that's it with the RAD diagram. Move along. So we're back on our dashboard. Let's get to the last simple Gantt control demo. And here it is. So what you have here is visualization of project management data. On the left-hand side are all the tasks in our project showing the dependencies and starting and ending dates. And on the right, you have connected bar charts showing the task dependencies and person completes in a timeline. And you can also easily switch around the view from being a month to a week or a day. And also be able to easily adjust the date formats, the start and end dates of the week, and hours worked. Back in Visual Studio, my markup is just one line of code instantiating the RAD Gantt control. All of the data is fed to it in the code behind. You'll notice that I have an XML file here called tasks.xml, which has all the project data. So back in my code behind, all I have to do is grab an XML Gantt provider, point it to our XML file, and set the provider on my rad Gantt control. And you can easily hook up the Gantt control to other data sources on the server and the client side. So that's it for the demos, back to the slides. So to recap, we covered 3 hard-hitting brand new controls in the Telerik UI for ASP.NET Suite: map, diagram, and Gantt controls. And all 3 of them have been engineered to empower you to build amazing enterprise applications. If you're already using our product, you should have gotten the latest bits already. If not, give it a free trial at the product homepage. You can also check out some of the refreshed demos that we have, as well as the comprehensive documentation. Also, check out the Telerik Developer Network, where we are trying to share a lot of real-world developer experiences. So, that's it from me, and hope you enjoyed this session. Here's my contact information one more time if you need to get hold of me. Thank you so much for your participation in this webinar. Grab the latest bits and have fun coding. Now, we covered a lot of things today, starting from tips on building mobile-optimized ASP.NET applications, managing your documents from within your .NET apps, and finally building line-of-business apps using map, Gantt, and diagram controls. Now, your mind might be buzzing with all this new information. So here's the best part. We're going to go into a live question-and-answer session with all 3 of us, Jeff, Michael, and myself, online and waiting for you. So whatever questions and concerns you have, fire away, and we'll try our best to answer. Thank you again so much.